Welcome along to Tweed Street, Scotland Occupied, home of the satirical saltire. I'm Cinnamon Bridges, aka Peter Barclay. This event is titled For the Love of Scotland. It's an Alba Equalities event, and the organiser of that is Eva Comrie. I would just like to go through some of the things that we're going to be talking about, or with the panel are going to be discussing this evening: are poverty, the council tax, proposed council tax freeze, women's rights, independence, and much more besides. The panel that we have is Rona Hotchkiss, Pauline Gilgallon, Professor John Mckendrick, Robin McAlpine, and Colin Turbett. Our guests this evening are Phil Boswell from the SNP and Colette Walker, the leader of the ISP. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining the inaugural Alba Equalities podcast. For centuries, Scotland's potential has failed to be realised because poverty has been overwhelming for too many. Financial poverty, poverty of aspiration, inequality, and dire, desperate lack of opportunity. Alba's aim and the purpose of the series of events is to establish a credible forum for the exchange of reliable information on where Scotland is and where Scotland could be heading. This is an innovation enabling all hearts and minds to focus on Scotland's needs. Scotland demands today, more than ever, that those in power listen to all voices of knowledge and experience, hear from those with credible, cogent plans which could be transformative, remove endemic generational hardships, and forge a positive future for all. With this in mind, let's go on and say hello, and thank you to all our fantastic panel, guests, and audience for joining us this evening. The panel, as I've mentioned, is Rona Hotchkiss, Pauline Gilgallon, Professor John Mckendrick, Robin McAlpine, and Colin Turbett. More about the panel soon, but first over to the event organiser, Eva Comrie, to say a few words. Over to you, Eva.
Thank you very much, Peter, and a warm welcome and grateful thanks to everybody who's agreed to participate and to our panel and guests. As Peter has said, and we discussed earlier when I spoke with each of you, this position, although it's arranged and managed on behalf of Alba, is really something that's, I hope, a kind of debating chamber where we can all talk with some knowledge and some experience, and also with curiosity about where we see Scotland's future, especially in relation to tackling poverty and inequality. I would imagine that I'm not alone in this audience or in this event as recalling one of the most poignant memories of my life in terms of political events, and that was the 1st of July 1999 when the Scottish Parliament reopened. You'll all remember Sheena Wellington belting out "A man's a man for all that." I was in tears, lump in the throat. I bet many of you were in exactly the same position. And those opening words, "Is there for honest poverty that hangs its head and all that?" And here we are, 20 odd years later, and poverty in Scotland in some areas is probably worse than it was then. And that, for me, is a great disappointment, and I'm sure it is to many of the contributors here tonight. We've got to do better than we've done so far. Politicians are not solving this problem, and goodness only knows why. But I'm hoping that some of the voices here of experience, whether that's professional or personal, are able to start and continue a dialogue that has an impact felt further than simply one political party or one set of elections. I want us to change Scotland for the better without delay. And I think these days, where we're also very aware of issues such as food hardship, food poverty, fuel poverty particularly being the topical thing, it's down to all of us as individuals as well as organised organisations to do all that we can to bring hope and also fulfil Burns's final words in that song, that man, you know, let us pray that come it may as come it will for all that man to man the world ours shall brothers be for all that. I think that's a great sentiment for us to carry into this tonight, and I hope that it's one that's shared by everyone, that we've got a collective community task at hand, and hopefully we're up to that task sooner rather than later. So without further ado, Peter, I'll let you go on and introduce the first panellist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. So the first panellist this evening is Rona Hotchkiss of the LGB Alliance, the ex-governor of HMP Cornton Vale, a former civil servant who retired over 2 years ago, so was limited as to what she could say before retiring. Rona served in other prisons, namely a deputy governor in Barlinnie, or Barrel, as some people might know it. Rona is an advocate for women's rights. Rona, over to you.
Well, thanks very much. Hello, everybody. A lot of faces here I ken well, and a few I've not met before, so big hello. Hello again, Robin. We just met for the first time yesterday, so like buses, eh? Don't meet you for 40 years, and then I meet you twice in a row. Anyway, so what I think some of you have probably heard me talking about women's rights as it pertains to women in prison, but what I wanted to do tonight was to shape what I know towards poverty, because it's probably the thing that concerned me most over my 10 years in the prison service and the 3 prisons I was governor in. So I just wanted to give people some background and tell you some stats about the Scottish prison population. Apologies for people that maybe know this inside out, but I hope it's useful to you. So we've got an unnatural, unusually low prison population at the moment because of COVID. But usually in Scotland, we jail about, or we have in prison about 8,500 people at any one time. And that is an international disgrace. Just to put that into context, if we look at one of our nearest neighbours, Northern Ireland, we jail 2.7 times as many people per capita as Northern Ireland does. So I find that very difficult to understand, because I'm damn sure the people of Scotland are no more inherently criminal than the people of Northern Ireland are, and it shows that we can do better. If you look at the very best performer in Europe, because that's what we should be aiming for, we have 8,500 people in prison, and Finland, with a population that's almost the same, has 2,700. So that shows you how wide of the mark we are in this country. And I have to say, recent governments have made absolutely no impact on this at all. So I wanted to look at who we put in prison. It probably doesn't come as any great surprise that about 95% of the people that we hold in prison in Scotland are males. But what makes people likely to go to prison? So what predisposes someone to coming to prison? So you're 13 times more likely to come to prison if you've been in care. 2.5 times more likely if a family member has been convicted of an offence. 10 times more likely if you were a regular truant from school, and 20 times more likely if you were excluded from school. 6 times more likely if you're a young parent, and 15 times more likely if you're HIV positive. So I'm saying these things to demonstrate that it's not these things that actually make you go to prison. It's the predisposing factors for all of these factors which then predispose to prison. Up to 70% of people who come into prison are drug users, and most of them will be in for drug-related offences, whether it's drug trafficking, drug supply, drug production, or offences committed when people were using drugs or using illicit substances. Horribly, 70% of people in prison have 2 or more mental health issues. This is an absolute bloody disgrace, and something that everybody in power in Scotland should hang their heads in shame over. I'll not say too much about mental health, because I know there's a future edition of this about mental health in the criminal justice system, so we'll leave it to that for exploration. 20% of men who come into prison, and almost 40% of women, have a previous suicide attempt in their lives. You're much more likely to come into prison if you're homeless or in temporary accommodation, if you're unemployed, if you have no academic qualifications, or if you suffered abuse or witnessed violence as a child. And yet only 1 in 6 people in prison are in there for violence. I want to take a wee sidebar for a moment to just say a wee word about remand. Remand is an inherently unjust system and another disgrace. So you can be in prison, the limit is meant to be 140 days awaiting trial. But in too many cases, you can be held in prison for up to 10 months without trial. Now, if I tell you that 60% of people who are held in Scottish prisons on remand don't go on to get a custodial sentence, so they're either found not guilty or they're given a community disposal, you can see what an absolute disgrace it was. If your life was not wrecked before you came into prison on remand, it will be afterwards. Because in 10 months, you've lost any job, any tenancy, debts have built up, you've maybe lost your family. So it's just a despicable disgrace that people are in prison for that long. Now, what I'll say is I don't blame the courts for this. People are mostly jailed for reasons of convenience, because the courts know that with people who have chaotic lives, if you stick them in prison, you'll be guaranteed to get background reports because people can access them. Social work can access them. They've got a chance of getting off drugs, whatever it may be, but sticking them in prison is not the answer. So if those are all the things that bring people into prison, I just wanted to consider for a wee minute, and I don't want to ramble on too long, I'm very open to questions, but what could keep people out of prison? What could bring our prison population down? And I've split it into direct, semi-direct and indirect. So at a very direct level, a few years ago, the Scottish Government introduced a presumption against sentences of under 3 months. Now, just to remind you that in prison, in Scotland in prison, you automatically only serve half of your sentence. So if you're sentenced to 3 months, you're actually in prison for 6 weeks. Anyone who knows anything about this will know that 6 weeks is utterly useless. You're barely detoxed in that time, never mind have time to sort out any issues. And my argument would be, if you're only dangerous enough to be in prison for 6 weeks, you're only dangerous enough not to be there at all. It's an absolute nonsense. But what happened when the Scottish Government introduced a presumption against sentences of less than 3 months was we got an awful lot of people in for 4 months. So it didn't really cut the prison population at all. Differently, there's electronic tagging, there's bail hostels, there are all of these things. We don't have to send people to prison on remand if they're not actually dangerous. So semi-direct, so things that could help to keep people out of prison or stop them getting in the first place. The first thing is a housing first model for Scotland. If you think about all the homeless people, all the people in temporary accommodation who come into prison, giving people a guaranteed secure tenancy would make such a difference to people's lives. And the second semi-direct issue for me is to have a universal basic income. And I don't need to say it, but every single one of these things that I've mentioned links to poverty. The indirect measures that would just about eradicate our prison population, apart from that hardcore 25%, are all of the causes of poverty that everybody here is going to talk about tonight, and I'll leave that to them. It costs about £40,000 a year to keep one person in prison in Scotland. Now, you don't save that whole 40 if you don't have them in prison, because there are economies of scale when you lock a lot of people up. But can you imagine if we saved 30,000 a year for 75% of people who are in prison in any 1 year? Can you imagine how much we could spend on the alternatives? At the moment, the alternatives aren't actually terribly effective, because when you see figures about how good the alternatives are, you have to remember that the alternatives routinely exclude the most difficult people. So they exclude people who are suicidal, who have psychosis, complex mental health problems, acute drug problems some of the time, who are suicidal. So what you get is sometimes, I'm not blaming the alternatives for this, but the slightly less complex people are hived off to the alternatives, and the more difficult cases, if you like, are concentrated in prisons. But can you imagine what we could do with another 30 grand a year for each prisoner that we kept out of prison? Because the alternatives need more development, more resources, we need more rehab, we need more money going into bail hostels and electronic tagging. Prison does help some people, but for most of the people it does help. It's a terribly temporary impact. So for most people, it doesn't continue beyond the front gate. It does for some people, but because we put the majority of people back into the poverty and desperation and chaos that caused them to offend in the first place, flinging them right back in there, it would take a Herculean feat of will to change your life when everything round about you is exactly the same. You've got unaddressed trauma, you've got debts, you've got unaddressed needs, you're living in violent and chaotic situations. So I think what I want to say in conclusion is there is a clear relationship between offending, imprisonment and poverty. Now, it's not an absolute relationship because the majority of poor people don't offend and never go to prison. And a good number of people who are not poor, middle class, upper class and so on, do offend and do go to prison. But the relationship is absolutely clear. I don't think it's actually a deliberate tactic that we jail poor people in Scotland, but the net effect of what we're doing to people is that we are trying to control the lives of the poor by using prison, and that's a bloody disgrace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rona. Right, so our next speaker is going to be Pauline Gilgallon. Pauline worked extensively with the homeless women and men of Glasgow for over 5 years as a rehabilitation officer. Her key role was in formulating and implementing of life skill retraining within a domestic setting. Pauline worked alongside a broad network of agencies in the delivering of support to her client base, including local authorities, the DWP and a range of voluntary organisations throughout the city. In recent years, Pauline has volunteered her time and skills on the board of her local nursery and school, Glasgow City Council Education Appeals Committee. Pauline has also been concerned with food poverty, organising many social media appeals to raise much needed supplies for food banks throughout the city when supplies are running low. She hopes one day that food poverty will only be something that children learn about in history class. Pauline's born and bred in Glasgow and is proud of her involvement of the Feeding Britain programme to bring Scotland's first ever citizen supermarket to the people of Glasgow. She is now a development officer for Three Hills Community Supermarket, which hopes to be fully operational later this year. Finally, Pauline also really proud of the Greater Pollock Mental Health Walk she does every Monday night with Greater Pollock Services, where they walk approximately 4 miles around Pollock, distributing leaflets and merchandise about mental health awareness. Talking to loads of folk, making a real difference to them, as sometimes folk just want to talk and is often told that they are glad of the interaction as they've had a rough time of it, and providing the helpline numbers is a real godsend for them. More proof in itself that all heroes don't wear capes. So over to you, Pauline.
Hello, thanks very much for that lovely introduction. I'm knackered listening to it. Hello, everybody. Hello, my name is Pauline Gilgallon, and thank you so much for asking me to come along here tonight. What I really want to talk about is food poverty and how we need to change the way we address food poverty, because like, oh crikey, I forget your name, the host, that's terrible.
Peter.
Oh, Peter, like Peter said, you know, we need, it's food banks are doing good stuff, but we need to move on for that. And I'm the development officer for Three Hills Community Supermarket and Good Food Scotland. So I'll just explain a wee bit about how this came about. There's a huge charity down south called Feeding Britain, and I'm in charge of making their first thing in Scotland, their first development in Scotland. There's nothing up here like what we're doing. So what we're actually doing is we recognise that people need food, you know, but food banks really aren't the way. I've spoken to a lot of people. They are the way for a lot of people. I'm no dissing food banks, please don't get me wrong. But we need to kind of move on for that model, because food banks, they do serve a purpose, but a lot of people are becoming too reliant on them. And there's a lot of people abusing them as well, unfortunately. So the model that Three Hills is doing and Good Food Scotland is promoting. Good Food Scotland's the wee sister of Feeding Britain, by the way. You'll be pleased to hear that we're setting up a Scottish version, Scottish network. Feeding Britain are a great organisation, but, you know, I'm in charge of starting a new thing in Scotland. But what we're basically doing is we're providing the food, but it's not free. People pay for it. They pay a much reduced cost for it, and they're happy to pay a much reduced cost for it, because, you know, you go to your food bank, you get handed a bag of food, you don't have any choice, you just take it away. And sometimes the food waste, don't even get me started in the food waste that happens with that as well. So what we're actually doing is people are coming to us, doing their shopping, paying much, much less. And we're also offering a lot of wraparound services as well. We work in partnership with many agencies, actually. I've been in post for 20 months, so I've been working like a right good to get my partnerships up and going. I'm just going to read for a list We work with all the local schools, primary and secondary, because we want the young people of the community to feel that Three Hills is for them. It's their space. It's for them to come to bring their nana a cup of tea, whatever. So, and schools are really good referrals for people that are living in poverty. Oh, sounds terrible. I work with the housing officers, the homeless prevention officers. I work with NHS health improvement practitioners, social work. I work with young offenders. I've actually been able to, Greg's Foundation, somebody else I work with. This is when I got all scattered. I'm dead sorry, I could talk all night. Greg's are actually got a Fresh Start programme, and there's a lot of young offenders I've been able to send to them. Females really that struggle with babysitting for their kids if they're out doing community service or whatever. So we work with the Greg's Foundation and the Fresh Start programme. I work with Autism Advisory Services, carers, Glasgow Life, Money Matters, which is a big thing because we've secured £40,000 for Money Matters. So that should have got Money Matters coming into us 2 days a week for 2 years. And there's a lot of people really excited about that because they're apparently quite hard to get a hold of. So we've got money for them to come in for 2 years. We work with the big supermarkets. We work with Tesco, Morrison's, Lidl, Aldi. Get a lot of stuff for them. The community champions are amazing. But basically our model is, it's a community supermarket. So the two big words that I like that are very important is dignity and choice. People can come and choose what they want and they pay much less. It's like £4 will buy you about £15, £16 worth of groceries. And we offer all these wraparound services as well. We work with, I don't know what I'm saying, I've read them out already. We work with mental health organisations. We work with the Carer Centre. Like I say, we work with the housing, the DWP. We're in connection with all these different organisations because people need to appreciate and understand that food poverty is a massive issue, but you giving somebody a bag of food or even letting them come and shop in the supermarket is not enough. We really need to make great strides to understand why people are in the situation they're in. You know, it could be lots of different things. It could be employability, it could be their mental health, it could be addiction, it could be housing situation. So basically what Rona was saying, a lot of what Rona was saying, I was sitting going, that's right, that's a lot of people come to us in these same situations. They could have debts, they could have addictions, you know, there's lots of underlying causes. Nobody just decides to wake up in the morning and just say, oh, I can't afford my food today. There's a reason why they've got to that place. So Three Hills Community Supermarket has got the partnership set up in order that we can help people with these things and, you know, address them. We're doing training, we're doing all sorts of things with them, but it's basically a one-stop shop. That is the plan. We aren't actually open yet, I've got to say. We've got the money sitting in the bank account, good to go. We've got everybody in place. I'm ready to go. John Mckendrick, who's on the call tonight, actually knows a lot about Three Hills and has done amazing research for us to help us in our way, and thanks John, but John knows all about us. But we're not actually open yet, but we do actually have 2 pop-up ladders in the area, and one of them is set at the bottom of a block of flats for, I call it the Aldgens ladder, over 55s. I'm 50 now, so I can kind of say that. Sorry Bill, I see Bill going, oh, sorry. But one of them set up at the bottom of a block, and it is basically just a wee mini supermarket, and the Aldgens love it because they don't need to leave their block. So like the day the weather was terrible in Glasgow, it was hailstoning and raining and horrible, and a lot of them were able to come in and just walk through the wee corridor that they've opened and do their shopping. I've also helped a couple of people in there with their booster jags, you know, the one they're getting their booster jags through. I was able to contact people to help get in touch with the NHS. I've distributed fuel vouchers, which is a massive issue. Everybody in this call knows what I'm talking about. That is a big deal. I chap a lot of doors as well, you see, because social media is good, but there's nothing like chatting a person's door and talking to them face to face. And there's a lot of older people on these social media, so that's how I'm reaching them. But see, to date, I've been chatting the doors for 4 weeks, and I've came across 6 pensioners sitting with no heating. Don't even know there's a fuel voucher scheme, don't know how to do it, don't know how to address it. So I'm really proud that Three Hills have been able to, you know, and we phone them every now and again as well. How you doing? What do you need? Etc. And that to me is at the heart of what I'm trying to do here. People need more than just free food or cheap food. They need the wraparound services that we're offering. When the big place opens up, we'll have the community supermarket, the community cafe, and if you remember, you get half price in the cafe. And I cannot tell you the amount of people that are so chuffed to get a fancy coffee for like £1.50 compared to your Costas and your Starbucks. People are dead excited about that, and that brings in the mental health aspects of what we're trying to do, getting people at the house, getting people mixing with other people. Community, in my opinion, has kind of been lost in many ways. And that's another part of what we're trying to do at Three Hills, is to bring communities together, to show people that, you know, somebody's here, and if we don't have the answer, hey, we'll go and find somebody that does get the answer, you know. And that's a big part of, you know, what Three Hills is all about Good Food Scotland's about, actually, because I'm now networking all over the country, speaking to people that are running food banks that want to make their model more progressive and make it into a community supermarket. So I'm actually talking to people that want to do mobile food buses in rural areas as well. There's just so much going on. I could talk all night. I'm trying to see who funded us. I think a lot of people ask me when I talk about this, who funded you, who funded you? We have got no government funding. All our funding comes from private trusts, the Suter Trust, the Tudor Trust, the Dalverton Trust, the Robertson Trust, etc. But what I can say, and I'm really excited to say, is a lot of these trusts and a lot of these foundations are recognising the need to move on from food banks, and are more than happy to support organisations like Three Hills with their funding, because they recognise the model is a really progressive model, and it's what people need now. Because, like I say, food banks, I still can't believe they even exist, you know that, but they're there. But we need to move on for them. We need to move on for that, because people that have progressed from a food bank to a community supermarket or a pantry, which is very similar, they're happy to do that. They're happy to move on from it, because it just makes them feel like everybody else, you know, just feel like an ordinary person going to the supermarket doing their shopping. I mean, nobody really wants to go to a food bank and be handed a bag of food, just half it they'll not even eat. I mean, you can't get a wee treat. People, I mean, we've got chocolate biscuits, and we get all the wee, you know, bits and bobs in. The Algians love all the crap, by the way, can I just say, which is pure shocking to me, because I was buying lots of vegetables in for the Algians, think they don't want to make soup. They don't, they want kettle chips and Mars bars. That's just blew my mind. But there you go, we get in what they ask for. But basically, that's it in a nutshell. I really can't speak as well as Rona did about statistics and things like that. I know John's going to cover that a lot better than me. I'm just I want to say lassie, but I'm 50 now, so I need to say woman. I'm just a woman in Glasgow trying to make a difference, you know. So, and we are doing good stuff, and that's it really. So I don't know if you move on to the next talker and I shut up now, or if you take questions, we move on to the next talker. I'll shut up now.
We've got Rona putting her hand up. So.
Oh right, okay, sorry, Rona.
Right, no, maybe she's done it by accident because her face went funny there when I said that. Right, that's cool. I would like to thank you, Pauline, personally, because it's close to my heart what you do. And I would like to think that you get thanks for people, but just in case you don't, I would like to thank you personally for what you do. You do a great service. All right.
Thank you so much.
And we'll move on to the next speaker, and then we'll take questions once we get through the panel and the guests, okay? So the next speaker is Professor John Mckendrick, a Professor of Social Justice. John's primary research interests are on poverty, particularly in children and children's play. John has published for academics and practitioners. He's particularly keen that his work is of use to practitioners and campaigners beyond the academy who seek to tackle poverty in Scotland, the UK and the EU. He co-edited Poverty in Scotland in 2016 and published several works on CGU's Caledonian Club. Together with Professor Stephen Sinclair, he co-directs the Scottish Poverty and Inequality Research Unit, SPIRU. John writes a research column for the Scottish Anti-Poverty Review and has been on Play Scotland's Board of Directors since 1997. So over to you, John.
Thanks very much. You know, I'm absolutely delighted to be with you tonight. I'm going to just quote back from what Pauline said there towards the end of the talk, that I'm just a wee lassie from Glasgow trying to make a difference. And that probably summarises my main argument, which isn't a big ticket transformation for what Scotland's going to do to tackle poverty, because I think what Scotland needs to tackle poverty is more hearts and minds in everyday practice and in everyday incidental ways making a difference. And it's that wee lassie for Glasgow or that wee lassie for Wick or wherever it happens to be that's just minded to make a difference. It's part of their everyday being that will tackle poverty in Scotland. But with that in mind, I think there are some big ticket things that we have to acknowledge and we have to recognise that we're working towards. Now we've talked. I mean, Eva introduced talking about 1999 and you know the inspiration, the reintroduction of the Scottish Parliament. But every single iteration of the Scottish Executive, come Scottish Government, has an anti-poverty vision. So we've not been ignoring this, but we've not been successfully tackling it since the inception of that Scottish Parliament. For those long enough memories, there'll be the social justice milestones right at the very start, which morphed into closing the opportunity gap, which morphed into achieving our potential. And today kind of sits in a little bit different space, and that's the Child Poverty Act of 2017, when we have a statutory obligation, not just an aspiration, but a statutory obligation to eradicate child poverty in Scotland by 2030. The politics of this are very interesting because the inspiration for that 2017 Act, that introduction by SNP in 2017, was a reaction against the withdrawal of a very similar Act in 2016 in the UK. Because in the 2010, collectively as part of the UK, we had the Child Poverty Act 2010, which aimed to eradicate child poverty in the UK by 2020. That was withdrawn in 2016, and a very similar aspiration was reintroduced in Scotland. Now, the reason for this kind of protracted historical recollection is that you can be an optimist or a pessimist when you look at what we've just said there. You can be an optimist in the sense of there must be something about who we are that wants to tackle this problem, because it's been on our agenda from the get-go. Call it social justice as it was in the early days, call it tackling child poverty as is our aspiration now. So I think the optimist says, look, there's a will to do something here in Scotland. The pessimist, or perhaps the realist, says that we're not doing enough, and we're not doing enough at all levels, partly national government, but also I think cascading right through what I do as an individual citizen or what local bodies do within their communities. And that's, I truly believe that until it's a hearts and minds issue, until more citizens in Scotland believe that in terms of everyday practice and everyday actions that what they must be doing is tackling poverty, then we're never going to solve it. It's vitally important that more pounds and pence in pocket goes in the very most impoverished in our society. Absolutely, totally important. But equally important is how we treat people. Equally important is all the everyday actions and everyday provisions that are part and parcel of our local government actions as well. And that's why I think drawing attention to the fact that it's not just one national ambition we've got in Scotland to eradicate child poverty by 2030, but we've got 32 local plans. As part of this 2017 Act, each one of our 32 local authorities has got to say, this is what's happening on our doorstep. This is what we're going to do. Local authority working together with the NHS, the local NHS board, but also with other partners. This is what we're going to do on our doorstep to make a difference. And those local action reports are reviewed. Those local action reports are meant to be transformative. Now, the reality is, I think that we're moving in the right direction. We've laid the foundations in the first Tackling Child Poverty Action Plan. We haven't made a difference. And if anything, things have got slightly worse, which we could blame in COVID if we wanted to get an easy way out. But the reality is the actions haven't been sufficiently ambitious. So we need more ambitious actions at a national level, but I also think we need to take control of that local agenda. And when we talk about local, we're not, to me, I'm not talking about just the scale of Glasgow or just the scale of a Highland. I'm talking about what Pauline's talking about in Pollock. It's about people thinking about, right, what does this doorstep of mine need? What does my community need? What can we do better with what we have? Now, there's a risk involved in that, because if we do the local really well, the risk is that the problems are masked over and we never deal with the fundamentals. But there's also a risk, I think, of only dealing with the big ticket issues about using social security or using taxation to solve the problem. Because I think we've got to do both. We've got to have the right national ambition, which I do think we have, but we've then got to have the commitment of everybody, private sector business, local authority, community groups, individuals in society, all working in the same direction. And to me, that's when we become transformative. That's what a better Scotland means to me. A better Scotland means to me is when we live up to these aspirations, when we don't just say that what we want, we don't just have a vision for a 2030 and eradication of poverty, but we're actually making concrete progress to get there. The final point I would make, and I'm happy to take any questions and discuss around issues and think about which population groups are most at risk. But we're a very interesting group of people in Scotland, because if you look at the hard evidence, we don't think that much differently to the rest of the UK. We sometimes like to think we do. We sometimes set ourselves apart as being totally different from elsewhere in the UK. But if you look at our attitudes towards social security and welfare, we're just a little bit different. We're just a little bit more welfarist in our outlook. We're just a little bit more inclined to have social justice interventions, but we're not fundamentally different. But that difference is enough to create a different political space. That difference is enough that we can do things very differently in Scotland. And the tenor of debate in Scotland is as you're aware, is completely different to the tenor of the debate south of the border, and to some extent Wales and Northern Ireland, but to a much lesser extent there. We have just enough difference to do things differently. We have, for example, the ability of credibly the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, Ruth Davidson, the then leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, Ruth Davidson, a few years ago, asked to give the annual lecture to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation about tackling poverty. That was a credible ask, because we've got a different political space in Scotland. It's a political space that there was universal support for the 2017 Child Poverty Act. Just 1 year after the Conservative government withdrew that commitment down south, Conservatives in Scotland in the Scottish Parliament voted for that act. So there is no reason why, given that there's general political will, there's a sense about this is who we are, we're a socially just nation, that we can't be transformative. But I think we have to realise that we can all be transformative, and we've got to start making these concrete actions, because, well, to some extent we could say, look, we've always done it, we've done it in the past, we've had our anti-poverty vision and we'll have it in the future. I kind of believe that now's a critical moment. We're formulating the second child poverty delivery plan. And I think if we don't begin to get things right over the next year, in fact, even the next few months, and then certainly the next few years, I think we're really going to lose that opportunity to be totally transformative in terms of tackling poverty. I wouldn't overstate it too much, but I do think it very much is a critical moment in terms of what we do right now if we're going to be serious about meeting that ambition by 2030. And it's the hearts and minds people, to my mind, that are really going to make a difference, and not big ticket issues. So I'm delighted to be here tonight, really hoping that we can get some debate and discussion, and very happy to answer any questions along the way. Thanks very much, Peter. Thanks very much, John. As I say, we'll get to the questions once all of the panel and the guests have spoken. But thank you very much for the meantime, John. Appreciate it. Our next speaker is Robin McAlpine of robinmcalpine.org. That's his attempt to do what he can to contribute more to Scotland by creating a place where you can get solid news and policy analysis, opinions and current affairs, new ideas to think about, and the resources to help explain important things that are happening. Robin's work in Commonweal means he can get access to a lot of information, knowledge and expertise, but by his own admission, he can't even begin to cover the entire gap in scrutiny of Scotland's policy and democracy, and it's why he starts by asking for help. So I'll just pass it over to you, Robin, please.
Hi, okay. I want to talk quite quickly here about a fairly limited number of things, because just with the scale of this question and the way that I want to approach it, the way that I want to come at this is from looking at this cost of living crisis. And the big question, what should we do about it in Scotland? It's not because there's an answer to that, because there isn't. It's because what trying to answer it tells you about what we ought to be doing. So very quickly, what can we do to deal with the cost of living crisis, a sudden rise in inflation that takes a chunk out of people's ability to spend in one go? The correct answer to that is, in Scotland, virtually nothing. That involves magicking money out the air. If you want to do these things very quickly, you want to make a difference like that very quickly, you need money. And that means either you can raise it or you can print it, which means you need either major fiscal policy or major macroeconomic policy, major monetary policy. We don't have either of those in Scotland. So what happens is we get a situation like this, and everyone says, quick, do something. And so we reach out for the tools that we have at hand. And our tools are blunt and clumsy and don't work very well. So we've got the council tax. And I don't actually think the Alba position this one's quite right. The council tax is an appalling tax. It takes 5 times as much wealth from the poor comparatively than from the rich. So if you're in the top housing band, you're paying 5 times less of your income because of the council tax proportionally than you would be if you're in the bottom band. What that means is if you freeze the council tax, then people at the top of the council tax tree get 5 times the benefit of those at the bottom. Even if you do it in bands, band D is a fairly generous house. So if you freeze everything up to, or you give bungs up to people up to band D, you're throwing your money very ineffectively. Now, this is something I find difficult to say because I'm a universalist. I really don't like targeting because targeting just tells you there's something wrong in your society if you've got to target. But in this case, in the short term, we don't really have any option. With limited money, we need to be very clever about how we spend it. And it needs to be targeted in the most need, which is woefully insufficient. So that just means we can shrug, say it's all Westminster's fault and trot on, does it? No. This is the point. This is what makes me so frustrated. What the sudden injections of money through social security or tax and spend, what that tells you is you've got a big glaring problem in your society that has just been exposed by some sort of external economic shock. So something bad has happened and it's revealed the fact, once again, that you've got major problems right across your society. So what could we be doing in Scotland? What could have been done to leave us in a position where this cost of living crisis isn't hitting people in the way they should? And I'm restricting myself to devolution here. So let's start a very obvious one. Very, very big component of the cost of living crisis of poverty is housing. Housing costs in the UK are crazy. In the last 20 years, 25 years, we've gone from a ratio of about 3 to 1 to about 7 to 1 in housing to income. Well, of course, this is going to absolutely devastate incomes. And it has. Housing is by far the biggest component, of most people's costs these days. And it keeps rising and rising. And as property is treated more and more as an investment, it pushes up private sector rentals as well, and they drag up public sector rentals. If we are going to continue to run our economy, our housing policy on the basis of the interest of the big developers, which is all that we do, this is going to happen indefinitely. So, number one, we could have built large numbers of high quality public rental housing, which would have increased housing supply, given people alternatives, given people controlled rents, and created a housing economy, a housing system, which is not dominated by the interests of, frankly, low quality big developers. We did the opposite. We got right down on our knees and said, want cheap planning permission for lots of houses, want us to stay out of the market, want help to buy schemes, it's all yours. So we keep inflating the housing market. We could have reformed the council tax. Like I say, the council tax is a phenomenally regressive taxation. In 2016, a Scottish government review published and said it's a terrible tax, it needs to be changed. And the Scottish government bottled it because the council tax is frankly a giant perk for the upper middle classes. It's just, people forget, council tax is poll tax redux. They couldn't get away with the poll tax. The poll tax was one set rate for everybody. So what they did was they came up with 5 set rates for everybody. That's what we've got, the council tax. And because we never reform it, every time that we need to use it, we reach for it and we discover it's a big, useless, awful, clumsy tool that doesn't work very well. Never mind the impact this has on local government. And if you cut council tax, who suffers? Well, it's the local authorities that suffer. And who is it that needs local authority services by far the most? It's those in the most financial need. So all you're doing is taking money away, giving money to the upper middle classes and taking it away from the local authorities that provide the services for the poorest. Reform the council tax. We could have done that anytime we wanted. We could have, let's pick 2 things in the area of energy. I mean, don't start me in Scotland, but we could have done so much recently in the last 10, 20 years to take collective ownership over electricity generation. Now, one of the things which I think is worth noting is the wind has not become more expensive this year. So wind is not more expensive. Wind is pretty much still there as it pretty much always was. And yet electricity generated by wind is becoming much, much more expensive. Why? It's because we average the price to the cost of gas generation. So the price of gas goes up. And if you own a wind turbine, you suddenly make the same increase in prices as you would if you owned if you were selling gas. And so we have this situation where energy prices are rising, frankly, to titillate a private market based around the City of London, which trades energy prices. We didn't have to take that route. We could have created an energy, there are limitations on what we can do under devolution, but we could have at least had a large proportion of the electricity in public ownership, which meant that the profits, the excess profits which are flowing into energy could have gone straight into the public first for the public good, which could have been redirected towards emergency need in Scotland. These are things we could have done. We could have insulated houses. About 40% of all your energy, on average, goes straight out the roof. 40% of the energy that you use in your house is just lost because of woeful insulation and the poor state of housing in Scotland. Now, ideally, we're building a lot of good, new, high quality, virtually passive housing, which we've kind of priced and modelled. And that would mean that we never again have these problems with a new generation of housing. Currently, we're building housing that will need to be I mean, this is just beyond me. We are currently building housing which is subsequently going to need to be retrofitted to increase its insulation standards to meet climate change problems. I mean, this is nuts. We're letting people build houses that we don't even think are going to be suitable insulation-wise in 10 years. Why? Because the big developers have been lobbying the Scottish government. We could have, if we had gone and started doing a proper house insulation programme, then houses would be inexpensive to heat. You wouldn't have fuel poverty in the way that we do. How many more am I going to do? I'm not going to do any more. I'm going to stop there. What I'm going to try and explain, what I'm trying to say is that social security and tax are just, they're nothing more than big signs of social failure. This says, as a government, we failed. We failed so bad that we've got to take money from one person and give it to somebody else because our entire economy is rigged in such a manner that we have gross inequality. We're not going to do anything about it, but then currently it's about once a decade, once every 8 years, we have a massive economic crisis. That's been going on for about 50 years now. And about once a decade, we all go, oh my God, inflation, financial crisis, austerity, housing crisis, deindustrialization, right back to the 1970s, price shocks, working weeks, etc. Every time it happens, we all go, oh, quickly, where can we find some money to deal with the fact that our economy is fundamentally wrong, our society is fundamentally wrong, our housing is fundamentally wrong. And when we're on about, we find out that, that there isn't the ability to do it. And worse, what we tend to do is pull out the stops. Well, we don't pull out the stops. We take the occasional stop slightly out and bung some money to people so they don't actually starve in the streets. And then the second the crisis is out the headlines, we just take that all away again, and we're right back to where we started for another 7 or 8 years, at which we gnash our teeth, set targets we've no intention of meeting, do press conferences and say how much we regret the poor, do bugger all about it, and then crack on until the next crisis. So the message that I want to get across here is I'd love to have talked industrial policy and rebalancing our economy away from low-paid jobs to proper paid jobs, which would be the fundamentally most important thing that we could do out of the whole lot. But my whole point here is, weep no bloody tears, chattering middle classes. I am tired of seeing you emoting on television about how awful poverty that you don't really understand is. There is an enormous range of things that you could get your finger out and do right now if only the people at the dinner parties that you go to didn't frown on such things like building houses or mucking about with the price of developers. You could crack on with this now, and in about 10 years, and I'm sorry folks, the next one's not going to be 10 years, the rate of economic crisis is accelerating as we head into climate crisis and the deleveraging of financial markets. But as we get into the next crisis, we could just maybe be in a position to say, look, we've built a resilient society which is equipped to deal with these kind of economic shocks because we don't have shit housing, shit food, shit jobs, and a complete disregard for the way that people live in the society. Because to be completely honest, I was at a £200 a head dinner with some lobbyists who told me that I've got a job after politics if I'll just do the right thing right now. That's the fundamental problem here. We take a short-term approach. We never fix the problem. We gnash our teeth every time someone points out there's something wrong, and then we go back to doing bugger all again. So let's start and do something after this one, which says next time round it's not a problem, or let's stop talking about it and just accept it that will always be with us. One or the other, and let's be honest about it. Thanks.
Wow, thank you very much, Robin. Absolutely fantastic. Aye, I'm on your side. Well done. Right, so our next speaker is Colin Turbett. Colin was born and raised in the south of England, where he attended local schools. In his teens, he developed an interest in motorcycles and motorcycling, and this has continued to be an important part of his life. Colin is one of 6 children. His life at home was comfortable, although money was never plentiful. Both of Colin's parents worked hard to provide. Moving to Scotland at the age of 19 in 1973 to pursue voluntary social work as a community service volunteer resulted almost naturally in obtaining a trainee social work post in the west of Scotland, leading to nearly 40 years as a frontline local authority social worker. Colin, over to you.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for having me along here tonight. I'm slightly surprised at the introduction. I'm not quite sure where that came from, but anyway, thanks anyway. I think I'll start with what was going on when I came into social work in Scotland in the 1970s, because when we're talking about poverty, it's actually hard now for people to recall that back in the 1970s, social workers were actually seen as being in the front line in the war against poverty and the war against inequality and for social justice. And by gosh, what a long way we've come, a long way backwards, because during the course of my career, I saw all that get eroded, and I saw social workers consigned to mopping up the worst excesses of poverty, the kind of things that Rona was talking about earlier, right down at the far end, right downstream. And our role in preventing people from falling on those hard times and falling into those difficulties, from falling into drug misuse, etc., was gradually eroded and lost. And instead, social work has become an occupation which is over-proceduralized, which is top-down, managerially controlled, which is obsessed with risk and risk assessment, whether you're talking about old people or young people. And quite frankly, you would be embarrassed to have a social worker in your home. So one of the things that I've been trying to do for a number of years now, before and since I retired formally from social work, is to try and do something about changing that and getting social work back to communities, out of the centralized offices, out of the silos, out from the over-specialization, and back to networking with people like Pauline out in the communities and doing the things that social workers were and still are trained to do. And over the last year plus, I've been absolutely delighted to have become involved with the Commonweal Care Reform Working Group, which Robin is also a member of, actually. And in the last few weeks, Robin has been working absolutely flat out, doing the final preparation on our blueprint for a national care service, which we will very, very proudly introduce to the public. Hopefully this weekend. We're counting on a national newspaper making a splash about it. Our blueprint is titled Caring for All. And I'll try, I haven't got time to describe all 30,000 words of it here, but I'll try and describe some of the key characteristics of it. Now, back in World War II, in the darkest days of World War II, a liberal called Beveridge came up with a plan for a national health service based on national insurance. And he didn't just come up with a plan and it appeared a couple of months later. That plan was discussed and debated amongst troops in the front line, people back home, people in factories. It was discussed and debated for several years before the Labour government enacted it after the end of the war. So it was the result of a great deal of debate and discussion. That sadly is not the case with the National Care Service, which our government have recently consulted on and are now drawing up proposals on. The National Care Service is a knee-jerk reaction, that the SNP's National Care Service was a knee-jerk reaction to an absolutely catastrophic series of deaths in care homes in 2020 as a result of the COVID pandemic. Now, that was a scandal. It was caused not by accident, but because people were bumped out of hospital without even being tested into care homes that became incubators for COVID. And so people died. And a huge proportion of people that died in 2020 were elderly people living in care homes. They represent something like 2% of the population, but were over 50% of deaths. So something had to be done about that. And in fairness to the government, they commissioned Derek Feely to look at that whole question. Feely came up with a report that we criticised from Commonweal because our work was already underway when his report was published in December 2020, January 2020. Our work was already underway by then. And we recognized that there were severe limitations because basically he was proposing a national care service that was centered purely on care homes and wasn't even in fact questioning the fact that most of them, 80% of them, are in private hands and making profits, some of which finishes up in tax havens. So he wasn't even questioning that. He certainly had lots of very good things to say about treating the workforce better, one of the shabbily treated groups in society, the social care workforce. But we wanted to extend it far beyond that. For us, care is not just something that you visit on old people nearing the end of their lives, but it's something that starts in the womb and lasts throughout life. And that care often delivered informally within families, often through other public agencies universally, and for some, when it's really needed, by state organizations on the basis of that need. So we wanted to combine all that into a cradle to grave or a womb to tomb national care service that would meet all need, free at the point of delivery. We decided very early on that there was no room for making profit out of social care, that had to be abolished immediately. And Feely and the National Care Service proposals will only extend that principle to care within people's homes. They won't extend that to residential and nursing home care, probably because of the expense of it. Now, we've got an answer to that. We have costed it. We've done some work around the cost. So we're not ignorant about the cost, but we believe that if you want a national care service that's fit to be alongside the National Health Service and the vision that lay behind that, then it has to be done properly. And what we got after the publication of Feely was within a few months, we got a set of proposals from Scottish Government that were not drawn up with the level of thought that our Commonweal group, who consists of several hundred years worth of experience working in the field, have brought together. It's a very comprehensive document. I commend it to you. If you have a look out for the Sunday papers, hopefully if there's no war in Ukraine or whatever, it will still be there on Sunday. Our report can be published and you'll see it. You can buy a nice version from the Commonweal website, a printed version, or you can download it for free. It is quite long. We've done shortened, summarized versions of it to make it a little more understandable and palatable. But what we've done is we've started from a set of core principles. We haven't started from just realizing that social care for the elderly was in a mess and then bolted things onto it piecemeal, like children's services and justice services and services for drug users and so on, literally bolted on without much thought by civil servants and people working for private consultancy companies. We've put that effort in ourselves to come up with a thoroughly thought through blueprint, and I can only commend it to you. Commonweal brand themselves under the title of All of Us Together. Well, I think all of us together in the Commonweal Care Reform Group are socialists. We're proud to say that. We had a discussion the other night about whether that word should be included in our final document, and agreed that it probably shouldn't. I, by the way, am a Scottish Socialist Party member, so we're composed, that group have all sorts of people involved in it. But we're all agreed that a vision for a national care service requires it to be a comprehensive one, not an ill thought through one, consisting of things bolted on, and to the point where there are so many objections being raised to it now from all sorts of groups that if the government really want to push it through, then they will have to trample over all sorts of people in order to get their way. And I'm not sure whether they can really achieve that. So what we're suggesting is that our blueprint offers the opportunity for some proper discussion about what a national care service should be and should involve, just as the National Health Service resulted from that kind of effort and those kind of deliberations. We're suggesting that you engage. So I really ask you all to make the effort to read the whole document and then talk about it amongst yourselves, talk about it with other people, and I will leave it at that. So thanks very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Colin, for speaking, and also for taking the time out this evening. Eva, I'm going to come to you. We've had the panel speaking. Is there anything that you want to come back with before we maybe have a wee recess and then go to Phil and Colette?
I think, like everybody else, Peter, yourself included, I'm blown away by the knowledge, the experience, the humility and the humanity of every single one of our speakers. If only Scotland were governed by these men and women, I think we would be talking about a very different landscape than the one that we see just now. So I'm happy to leave it at that for the moment.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you very much for returning after that short break there. We're going to pass it over now to Phil Bosley, the SNP. Phil is a regular commenter on a show that we watch every Sunday, and he's very insightful. So Phil, over to you to make a statement or ask questions, anything that you've heard so far, any of the panel members, and I'll try and showcase the panel, the member that you're addressing the question to, Phil.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you for getting us on. It's a pleasure. The first point, it seems to be that amongst all these good guys and brilliant doers of good, I'm the only evil capitalist, oil and gas contracts manager with BP, Shell, Statoil and the like. But all these wonderful ideas, initiatives need paid for. And we have a country to lead to independence, and that includes all of us. And it's a broad church, it's essential. And that's why I firmly believe no party should lead the Yes campaign. It should be exactly what we did in 2014, except it shouldn't be, it cannot be, for me, another referendum. I think it has to be a plebiscite for many, many reasons. And I would refer to Alf Baird and SSRG on that one every time, because the parties they're compromised by the loyalty to their party progression rather than the truth. And we really need to set the record straight and deliver what we need for all of us. Second point, some points I was going along. Rona, absolutely fabulous. Poverty equals prison. And I don't know what the rest of you think, but I would like to see the likes of Eva, who I know before, and Rona run the Department of Justice, because that's the kind of people you want. You want experts who actually understand what it's like from the ground up. As an ex-cop, I understand about that. Another reason I'm in the bad books. I'm all right now, still taking the tablets. 3, Pauline. I love it, Pauline, giving people their dignity while providing support. Because, as George Michael said, charity's not a coat you wear twice a year, you know, and handouts don't cut it. It's essential, but it's tragic that some people think that's it. They've done their bit. No, it's not even scratching the surface. We're grateful for it. But on to what John was saying, I totally agree, John. Put your own house in order first. We need to put our house in order and look at our communities, 100%. And Robin, the same thing. Target what's most needed. Talked about housing, council tax. Land tax is something we need to seriously look at with a body that can, because that's a game changer if we do it properly and look at what other countries are doing around the world. And again, I defer to SSRG and Alf Baird, and we all need to be communicating, and we all need to be reaching out to each other. This is why I love forums like this, and more power to it, people. Next point I would make would be something I looked at in terms of lists of all the things that have been listed. How do you prioritise? Who gets priority of what everybody said? There's a brilliant book by Bjorn Lomborg and the Copenhagen Consensus called How to Spend 75 billion to Make the World a Better Place. And he looked at UN's top 200 priorities, which is a wish list. It's not a priority list, it's a wish list. And he put teams of economists. And this is what it takes. It takes people who feel and do on the ground, as well as the theorists and the boffins in the background, to figure it out. And what these experts came up with was a list of 14, I think, or a dozen or so priorities out the top 200 that gives the most bang for the buck. And almost all of them were about getting children out of poverty, dealing with malnutrition. And this is worldwide. And this is at a time when more of our children are going into poverty, which is an absolute disgrace, at the same time as the vast majority of people. I'm working in India, building a bridge over the Ganges at the minute in a remote, very poor part of India. And they're bringing their children out of poverty. China, massively bringing their children out of poverty. We're regressing. It's an absolute disgrace. And the message about tackling poverty, it affects everybody. How do we get this to the people who are not of a socialist leaning or not a carer, don't care? Well, it affects them as well, because it increases crime, dependency on the state, poorer qualities of life. No, this is our system. Capitalism, there's a hierarchy here, and they tend towards tyranny. There's no doubt about it. And the message to the Tories, it affects you, because if it becomes more imbalanced and too tyrannical, it will collapse. And all your wee jollies are finished, mate. You know, you can forget it. You need, for your own self-interest, you need to care. Maybe care is the wrong word. You need to not be too greedy, is the message we need to send to these people. 7, on energy, something Robin touched on. You should know that renewables will never replace fossil fuels, ever. The wind and the solar will never replace fossil fuels. Smart turkeys don't vote for Christmas, right? They just don't. Why do you think the big oil corporations are investing in wind and solar? Because it's never going to change. All the City of London forecasts from all the investors are all saying 60 years more of oil, increased demand throughout the world. It's the way it's going to be. Even electric cars don't make much of a difference. Use just as much oil and fuel. Look at the paint, your screens, your glass. Everything we do is oil-based. It's something we're going to live with for a while. And, you know, absolutely, there's a lot of green philosophy we should be looking at. And the final point I would probably say was from Colin. It's back to the quality of people that are on this programme. Colin should be running social work, you know. Governments need to listen to experts, and we should be putting and pushing parties that put the expert in position, rather than parties that move towards populist policies. So I applaud you all. This is wonderful. We need to continue to talk, and it has to be a broad church, and we have to be inclusive, and we shouldn't deplatform anyone. You need to know, I mean, I abhor fascism, but I'm nobody's comrade. I'm really not, because I look at the swastika and I look at the hammer and sickle, and if you're counting the bodies in tens of millions, nah, I'm choosing a middle path. So we all need to talk and we need to bring everybody along. So more power to Ollie. This is wonderful, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Will, for commenting, for taking the time out of your schedule while you're working abroad to actually come on and give us your views. It's really appreciated. Thank you so much. Colette, we're going to come to Colette Walker, who is the leader of the Independence for Scotland Party. So Colette, over to you to comment.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Peter. First of all, I would like to thank all the panellists for their input tonight. Totally agree with everything that they've said. And also, Phil, there, your very first point there, Phil, about a plebiscite. That's something that we have been talking about in the ISP for the past nearly 2 years now, as a plebiscite, not a referendum. So totally agree with you in that. We really have to start in general throughout all the different areas that we've been talking about tonight and beyond, because there's so many other topics that we're not going to be able to cover tonight for Scotland and the population of Scotland, for our well-being, is actually looking outside the box, thinking differently, not going down that same route all the time. One of the main things is that I always try and think along the lines of prevention rather than cure. It's too late when people are in crisis to start then thinking about changing it, because it takes far too long to make those changes, and it actually costs more. Prevention actually helps and it costs less. Sadly, I could relate to every single speaker on the panel tonight. Probably that's why I'm in the position that I'm in right now in politics. Sadly, because I can relate to everything that has been said tonight for different reasons. Rona, with the prisons, I'm a big advocate of rehabilitation. When Rona was talking, my thought before she came on to how much it costs per year to actually have somebody within a prison service, I was already thinking, and have done for a long time, about the use of the money, the better use of the money that we use to imprison people who are not a danger to society, but need help, they need support, they need rehabilitation, they need guidance, they just need help. But we're paying out all this money and they're around people that they're going to get even more criminal minded because of who they're going to be basically in bed with. They're in a cell with somebody who is probably an even worse criminal. So really the money has to be reinvested. It has to be looked at again. We have to think out the box. It has to be rehabilitation. It has to be person-centred. And I think that's one of my main phrases throughout all the different areas. It's person-centred. It has to be person-centred. Pauline, the work that you're doing is amazing. Total respect to the work that you're doing. I would like to know more about it. I just think that could be used in so many of our local areas. Totally agree with the food bank situation. People who have been made to be in the position that they're in right now, and they've never been in the position of poverty before. They feel humiliated. They might not want to go to food banks. It's seen as, you're basically steerage. You're the lower of the low, and people should never be made to feel like that. We can all fall in hard times. We can all, they only say it's you're a couple of pay packets away from being in poverty, and that's happening more and more. And again, prevention, but why is that happening in 2022 in Scotland and in the UK? It's just incredible. So, community-based services with a wrap round is is amazing. And again, what you're saying, Pauline, about chapping on the doors, because not everybody has the internet, and again, might not be able to even afford to have broadband and Wi-Fi or a computer in their house. So I totally agree with the wraparound service. One of my things with all the different organisations or cross-party groups that I've been involved in over the years, I always say, yeah, these are all sounding great, but the people that are needing them, how do they hear about it? I'm hearing about it because I'm in this meeting right now, but how are the people actually that need these services hearing about it? So again, we really need to look at how this information is getting to the people that are actually needing the service. Colin, you're talking about social work. Yeah, needs total reform. Basically, social workers these days, they're having to be a master of all trades, where it used to be that they were in a department and they dealt with that department, but now they're needing to get to know absolutely everything. So, for example, I was a carer for my son up until his adulthood, and you know, I was a single parent, and sometimes at the very last minute I would get my social worker phoning me to say that she had to go to a child protection case or something. I don't want anybody being harmed, but I was at point of crisis myself because I was on my own with a disabled son. Because they had to deal with every aspect of social work, there was no specialised independent social work to deal with disability, child prevention, and now a lot of them are having to deal with self-directed payments as well, so they have to get to know every single thing, and people are just being forgotten about. So a total transformation, and again, it's about respect. All of these things that we're talking about people need. We need to give a fair pay for a job that's professional. All the jobs that we require, whether it's to do with mental health, whether it's to do with rehabilitation, whether it's to do with social work, the NHS, social care, all these jobs are professional jobs that we all rely on. They should be paid. We have to look at these jobs, how they're paid properly, because they are professionals. They're leaving in their droves because they don't feel respected. They're shattered because they're having to work longer hours. So we really need to have a look at how we treat people in society, the people that are using the service, but the people that are providing the service as well. And again, just recently, my father was ill, and he was sent home from hospital. Yes, he was given carers to the house. It wasn't person-centred. And I realised that the carers that were coming in weren't what my father actually needed, because he needed things such as somebody going for his shopping, somebody to do his housework, somebody to take out something simple as take out his rubbish, because he was housebound when he came out of hospital. None of the carers that they had set for him were able to do any of those three tasks that I've just mentioned. So it was a waste of resources. It wasn't person-centred. So I cancelled them and I dealt with it myself. Not a lot of people have that. And what Pauline said earlier on about going to somebody's door and them not having heating on, etc. Well, that could have been my dad if I wasn't there, that he could have been sitting with no shopping. Because I said to them, well, you're there to heat up his, make his breakfast or heat up his lunch or his dinner. But if he doesn't have any food in because nobody's been able to go shopping for him, how do you heat up food for him? So again, we have to look at person-centred. My last thing that I would like to say is again about the attainment gap to do with our education. Our education system needs totally revamped as well, because again, it's a spiralling downward spiral for people who are either in a poverty-fueled family who are maybe not academic in themselves, or they have a disability, or possibly all of the above. There isn't the proper means to proper classroom assistance. It's not person-centred at all. The further education for people with disabilities, I am a big advocate, and I think Robin knows this, about apprenticeships, especially with the new Environmental Green Deal, to get people with additional needs into apprenticeships when they leave school. But we also need to look at further education to get people who have got additional needs out into society that can contribute. They're not given the chance, they're not given the opportunity. So I would just like to thank everybody who was here tonight. We've got so much to do and so little time to do it. But I think this is really important, that people actually start in looking at the likes of the parties that are coming forward now, who are grassroots, with people with life experience, because we're the ones that are coming from that background. We understand it. We're not coming back from just listening to people on a forum. We actually have lived the experience, and we can work with the experience that we've actually came from.
Thank you, Colette. Thank you so much for commenting. Right, so we've got Alan Petrie, and I'll come to Alan first. That's the first one that I've seen. Alan, if you want to come on and ask your question, see if you get your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to tonight. This has been a great night. A lot of information coming forward, and the guest speakers have been absolutely brilliant. I've got a few questions. One for Rona. You mentioned early on about the major problem of health, mental health for convicts. Now, going back in history in France, after the World War, they brought in a foyer project, which was to help soldiers to come in and readapt back into civilized life. And within that, they had people that were there to deal with mental health problems and getting them back into work and all other social problems they had. Tony Blair tried that, but he tried it on the cheap and missed out the mental health problems. Do you think that would be a way forward of prevention rather than dealing with problems? On the issue of food poverty, for Pauline, do you believe that just being given food isn't a way out of food poverty? You've got to be able to cook that food and learn how to cook not just a meal for the night, but meals for a few nights. And at schools, one of the biggest problems is they're taught to cook for one. Whereas if you are a cook, I mean, I used to be a chef, we could make mince and tatties one night, and with the food that's left over, make shepherd's pie for the next night and chilli for the night after. So you're making that go a little bit further and teaching people how to actually cook. John mentioned the poverty. Sorry, hold on. We're taking notes here. Yeah, poverty is not just about income to the family. It's also about service provision. I mean, you could have lots of money coming in, but if you don't know how to spend that money, then it's not helping you. So for years and years, we've had local councils cutting money advice project budgets, which is detrimental to the impact on poverty. So do you think that we should be investing more money into that to help people out of poverty, to help themselves, rather than just giving them handouts all the time? And Robin mentioned the issue about poverty as well, and wages in particular. Do you think it's now time to move away from the percentage wage increase structure to having a system of where you take a middle wage, you work out a percentage from that, and you take the monetary value and you distribute that throughout your workforce? So those at the higher end don't get quite as much as what their percentage wage increase would give you, but the ones at the lower end would get a bigger increase in wages, but wouldn't separate the divide between the poor and the well-off.
Thanks, Alan. Pauline, do you want to come back in on what Alan was asking there?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. You were talking about cooking, Alan. That is something that we're addressing, and we know is a massive, massive issue. Food education's sorely lacking in so many households for many different reasons. So something that we'll be doing in Three Hills is in the community room. We're going to be having cookery classes. We're going to have a camera above the island, and we're going to be recording and posting on YouTube so that people can learn how to cook your most basic of meals, because we are finding that, I think we all knew this anyway, but the more people I speak to, the more I'm realising that, you know, a lot of people just aren't raised in the kind of families where they're taught how to cook, and like you're saying, they go to school and they learn how to cook for one. I've got lots of people so excited about the fact they're going to learn how to make soup. I can't tell you, soup's the big, you know, but we're going to be doing a lot of food education classes within Three Hills. And if I can also just mention that the rural mobile food vans that are going to be going out all over Scotland within the next few years, unfortunately they're needed. There's something in these different areas they go to, and we're calling them bus stops. And what we're going to do basically is, ahead of the mobile food provision going out, contact like church halls or community centres or whatever in all the areas that the van's going to, and just arrange for, you know, things to be happening at the bus stop, you know. So the van will go out with the foods so that people can shop a lot cheaper, but they'll also be able to go and learn how to cook, how to do lots of different things at the different bus stops, you know. So food education is very, very high in their priorities. So definitely going to be addressing that.
Thank you, Pauline. Rita Bailey, we'll come to you first, and then we'll go to John Marshall. John, sorry I missed your hand earlier through this week, but we'll come to you after Rita's asked her question. Thanks.
Right. Hi, guys. Great information tonight. Really enjoying it. There's a couple of points. First point, I'd like to thank Pauline for her work. She's doing an amazing job. And moving away from food banks, I think, is a good thing, because there is a stigma attached to people using food banks, and people are embarrassed to use it. It shouldn't be, but they are. My daughter works at the NHS, and nurses are having to access food banks, which I think is absolutely appalling, but they're embarrassed about it. So I think moving away from that and actually like accessing a supermarket where it's normality for them and there's no stigma attached, I think it's a brilliant idea, and well done, Pauline. Second point is to Robin and the housing poverty. Now, we know the housing stock in big cities like Glasgow and Edinburgh, more so Glasgow. You're getting all these landlords coming in and they're buying apartment blocks and apartments. And some of them, to be fair, you wouldn't put your dog in them, and they're disgusting, they're rotten with damp, they're mouldy. But people have got nowhere else to go, so they're moving into these apartments and paying exorbitant rents to these landlords. Whereas in Berlin, overseas investors were buying blocks of apartments after the wall came down, and they were charging ridiculous amounts of rent. The Berliners had enough, and they took to the streets of Berlin. There was 40,000 of them took to the streets, demonstrated against private landlords, putting these rents up to where they couldn't afford. And the Berlin government, the German government, Angela Merkel stepped in and brought it down. And there was a cap on the rents. I think it's still ongoing. But she has stopped of foreign investors coming in buying blocks of apartments and absolutely charging ridiculous amounts of money and basically making fortunes out of this. So I think the Scottish Government and the Glasgow City Council and Edinburgh City Council should be looking at something the same, a rent cap for private landlords, that they can't charge whatever they want, and to bring the housing stock up to a decent livable level with these people. They can't afford to move out these flats. They can't afford to buy houses. They don't have the money. So why should they live in poverty? Because some landlord just thinks, I'm just going to make a killing here. So this needs to be addressed. There needs to be a cap on the rents that these people are charging. It needs to be brought to a livable standard. And the government, Scottish Government and Glasgow and Edinburgh City Council needs to get on board with this and actually sort this out, because you're never, ever going to get people out of poverty while you've got this. Because while they're paying these rents, they can't afford everything else.
Thank you, Rita. Robin, do you want to come back in on that? Or are you quite happy just to have heard what Rita says?
Oh, yeah, just quickly pointing to the fact that we've published a report. We've published a paper on this. So if you go onto the website, we published jointly with Living Rent, which is the private tenants association, particularly young renters. And we've got a full detailed proposal for a proper system of rent controls in Scotland. But, I mean, for anyone that doesn't know, I was a political lobbyist. That's what I did for a living before I left to cleanse my soul by setting up lefty think tanks. And if you want to understand what's going on in Scotland, it's useful to work out, just to be aware who is the powerful lobby. And I'm afraid housing is all but the most powerful lobby in Scotland. The Homes for Scotland, the big developer, lobbied against these sorts of measures because it benefits from the corporate bulk buying of properties. If you look at what happened during the pandemic, to Scotland's absolute shame, Boris Johnson gave more protection to tenants in England than Nicola Sturgeon gave to tenants in Scotland. The tenants, the private landlords association in Scotland is quite powerful and well connected, and they lobbied against it. So, I mean, of course, we should have rent controls, but we faked them twice. We've got a thing called rent pressure zones, which are designed virtually to be unusable. And it's just one of these categories of, yes, we can do all of these things. Of course, we ought to do all of these things. And really sadly, in public, the politicians pay lip service to doing these things. But when you actually make the policy, it's KPMG and Persimmon Homes that are in the room, not the poor. But one thing I will say is, just like Social Security is a sign that there's something wrong with your income distribution in society, so the need for rent controls tells you something that's more fundamentally wrong in the housing market. And that is supply. There is far too little supply of public rental housing. And the Berlin example is a great example. When you get your head around the fact that in Germany, young professionals don't buy houses, they rent, and they don't rent largely in the private sector. Young people move, they move jobs, they move towns, they fall in love, they fall out of love. You don't buy a house till you settle down and have kids. Now, the idea that a young aspiring professional, a doctor or accountant or a lawyer in Scotland would from first choice go to public rental housing seems like an anathema to us. But it's this balance that we have in Germany where it's not third and third, but it's like a third's private, a third's public, and a third's owned, owner-occupier. When you've got a balanced economy, a balanced housing market, the market works. And when you've got a distorted housing market, the market fails. We've got a distorted housing market. So the key thing is build housing. And I mean, really just to pick up Phil's point and in between, sometimes you don't have to choose between the things you do. We can build public rental housing without any public subsidy. It's a profitable business. You've just got to borrow like you borrow for a mortgage and build. And this is one of the things that's very frustrating. If we increase the supply of quality housing, it would immediately have an impact on various of the rest of things, particularly if we did it in combination with reforming the council tax and implemented rent controls for an interim period until we got the market fixed. There's so much we can do, we just don't.
Rita, do you want to come back in on what you've heard there for Robin? Are you quite happy with that?
No, I'm quite happy with that, and I totally agree with him that most Germans don't buy their houses. We seem to be obsessed with buying houses. And this is how people cannot get on the property market. They cannot get rental housing because everything that's coming up is going up for sale. Germany don't have that. The majority of them do rent. I mean, I live there, the majority do rent. Us in America seem to be obsessed with buying properties. Maybe it's time to stop and actually, as Robin said, start building affordable council houses for people to live in and get rid of the poverty, the homelessness. And it's every bit of land. I live in East Kilbride. Honest to God, every bit of land is private developers are still building. Yeah. And you're like, build some council houses because there's a demand for it. People can't, I mean, I work with a guy and he applied for 4 rental properties and he was pipped to the post for every single one of them. He finally got one, but he missed out on 4 rental properties. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rita. John Marshall, I'm going to come to you next, mate. Sorry, again, I apologise. I never seen your hand up physically when I done the sweep. So over to you and ask your question, make your statement.
All right, Peter, thanks. Hi to everybody that's on the panel. Firstly, I think we all should be honoured here tonight for Phil Boswell to come out and give us his time instead of spending time with the King of Albania. Phil's friends with the King of Albania, if anybody doesn't know. And also, to go back to what Robin says, he's absolutely spot on. We keep talking about this and we never, ever gain an inch. On to what Pauline's doing with our Three Hills journey and what John Mckendrick said, I would basically like to just go in and let you know what we do at our level. So I'm selected as an Alba candidate in the Hollowtown and Moss End ward for this year's council elections. And what we've been doing since 2015 is we've been running a Christmas toy appeal. Now this came on the back of also Phil Boswell's friends with these people as well at Spirited, but we started in our own community as well, doing the Christmas toy appeal for the local schools. So that's been going on since 2015. I know it's not as much as what Pauline had talked about now. I mean, this isn't a solution, it's a small term fix, but the way I look at it is if we can do it in our town, that all you guys out there in every village and town across the country could help your schools as well. And it's not a solution, it's just a short-term fix. However, we've started an Easter egg appeal as well, and obviously with this heat or eat thing that's going to be happening this year, there will be kids out there who don't get Easter eggs. Now, you might think that that's no major, but if a kid's not get heating and they're no eating and they get a wee Easter egg, it keeps them happy for an hour, a couple of hours or whatever, do you know what I mean? And every one of us here can do that. That's doable. So basically, I just think that if I can do it in my town and people's get the time, there's a few bodies can rally around, everybody can do it in their town or their village or whatever. And also think that as I said, it's definitely not a solution, it's a short-term fix. I'm also currently working on a motion for the Alba conference, and it's a proposal for a national funeral service. I can't say too much about that just now because the bones yet isn't finished, concluded yet, but I'm hoping that drags people out of poverty as well, because you come into the world with nothing and then your family's got to pay for you to get out, and I just think that's disgraceful. 2022. So that's all I'd like to say. I'd like to say thanks to everybody for listening.
Thank you very much, Sean. I wish you good luck.
Cheers, Peter.
And you're running for council there. I wish you the best of luck.
Cheers,
right, I'm going to do a wee share. Phil Boswell's link to the book that he was talking about, just so that everybody's got a chance to see it. There's a free version which I'll post to anybody who wants to get it. He's shared it in the chat, and this is it here. So it's how to spend 75 billion to make the world a better place. Is that right, Bill? Phil, sorry, is that right? You just unmute yourself. And
yeah, that's it. That's on the money. And if you go to the Copenhagen Consensus website, it's available there. I don't know if you've got to sign up to it, but it doesn't cost you anything if it does. But this guy's he's a statistician, and he uses economists to determine how to get the best bang for your buck, how a society ought to make the world a better place and what's important for people, for the planet, for everything. And it's all about getting kids out of poverty. I'll unmute now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, so that's the book. The end it wants a link to it, as Phil says, to save you if you having to get it for Amazon. We'd be happy to share that with you. We're going to stop the share now, and we're just going to run through, if I can ask Lynn Sheridan, she's got her hand raised, and we'll just run through each person that's got their hand raised in the order that's on the screen here. So Lynn Sheridan, first of all, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Can I just say a big thanks to everybody who's came along tonight, and it is, about cross-party, and that's how we're going to, get the solutions to the issues that we've been discussing tonight. It's not about being territorial and being sectarian in terms of political aspirations or whatever it might be. Can I just make a couple of points, and starting with what Rona was talking about, and I was saying in the chat about joining up the dots. I think one of the issues that we need to look at, and it relates to the points that Colin was making as well in relation to this proposal for a national care service, is that we need to look at these companies that are involved in what is now big business in relation to the most vulnerable members of our society, and when they're at their most needy. We've got companies that are under the auspices of saying that they're charities, making profits from services in relation to these individuals, be it in criminal justice, be it in the care for the elderly, be it in terms of children's services. Although one of the things we did in Scotland was say you couldn't profit from services and working with children. But I think one of the points that Colin's raised as well is, and I would highlight, is that in terms of this report, the Feeney report that you spoke about, which went on for about 90, 100 pages, whatever it is, there was one paragraph in it that talked about expanding the concept of a national care service to cover other areas of health, social care in Scotland. And from that, this government have gone hook, line and sinker for this national care service. And what they've done is they've not consulted before they sent out the consultation paper. Colin, through his work with Unison Trade Union and myself at GCU, we run a monthly webinar for social work workers, for Unison members and for social work students, looking at radical social work. And one of the things that we looked at was this national care service, and we had the president of COSLA speak at one of our webinars. And what she told us was that before the consultation went out to the public, the Scottish Government didn't consult COSLA about their proposal. And the machinations of this could be enormous for democracy and transparency in Scotland, because they're looking at the current model of the health and social care trust boards that are currently running. And they're talking about taking social care, social work out of local government. Now, some might say, well, that's good because it'll be in the one place and there's 32 chief execs who might be losing their jobs. But at the moment, your locally elected councillors decide what are the priorities in your local area. That will be no more. These will become national priorities. And I think it's something that people have not really been told much about before the council elections. And it's a question that really people should be asking about, is what is this national care service going to mean for the democracy in our local areas? So much more that I could comment on. I don't want to take up much more time, but we're, as Equalities Committee, I'm part of the Alba Equalities Committee. One of the things that we're hoping to do is run a number of these webinars on different subject areas. And Rona had mentioned mental health. That's just one. We're looking at children's services as well in relation to CAMS and the waiting lists and all the rest of it. So I would hope that folk will come back to the next lot that we organise, and that some of the speakers will come back to speak on these more specific areas. Tonight was a kind of overall coverage, but I'd really like to thank all of the speakers and the contributors to the webinar tonight. So thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Colin, I don't know if you wanted to come back in on anything that Lynn was saying there.
Yeah, please. Lynn's absolutely right about the lack of democracy in the proposals being put forward by the government. It's a highly centralised bureaucratic model, much more so than the kind of hybrid one that exists at the moment, where you've got partnerships, so-called, between local authorities and health boards. Now, they're not really partnerships at all. They're completely dominated by the health interest. But the proposal wants to expand that model. Now, our proposal through our blueprint is that the National Care Service should be delivered through local authorities. And local authorities may well need reform. They're not perfect. They're far from ideal. But there's a democratic model there already. We elect councillors. There are people here who've said they're standing tonight, and there's a reason for that, because as Lynn said, local authorities can determine what the priorities are in their areas through local networks and through councillors. That will not be possible with a service led by a government minister. And we all know what that means. That actually means civil servants and private consultants. That's not what we need. We need more democracy so that things are really delivered at community level. And that's the other aspect of our proposal I want to highlight, because people here have talked about the importance of communities, talked about the importance of doing things at community level. And we believe that that the National Care Service should be delivered at local level through community hubs. Now, we've seen them grow up through the pandemic and become very important aspects of community life. That's something that we should grow and think about and celebrate. It's an idea that's been around for a long time, but cuts and austerity have reduced these facilities hugely, and we need to regenerate them and make them central to a new National Care Service. Thanks.
Thank you, Colin. Lynn, do you want a chance to come back on anything there that Colin had said? You're on mute, not right. Okay, that's fine. Okay, thank you. Right, so we're just going to go through the hands up. So Gordon, you're the next one. If you want to just unmute yourself and just on you go.
Thanks. This is not a question so much as a comment. The whole thing has this evening, I think it's been great, but and there is a but. I'm a tax accountant and I live in London, which may have diverted my mind over to the dark side. But going back to what Rona said right at the beginning, my partner works in child protection in Greenwich. And I'm not at all surprised that children, teenagers who've been in care are predisposed to go to jail. But it's not particularly to do with poverty. It's largely to do with lack of resources. The social work departments get very, very little. Now, Greenwich is notionally a Labour council, but there is no way that Greenwich is going to fund social services for children to any higher a level than they are at the moment. It would be politically unpopular. And we actually live in Bromley, which is a Conservative borough, and again, they don't want voted out. They're not going to do this either. And what Robin and John were saying about poverty reduction and changing council tax and so on, I agree with it. It sounds good, but when you actually try to divert money, my experience as an accountant with my clients is that what people say and what people tell you and what they're willing to do are two entirely different things. Everybody will tell you, if you say, can we put an extra pence on national insurance ring fence for the NHS, or maybe we should put up council tax on the highest bands because it would help provide services. Everybody will say, yeah, that's a good idea, until it comes time to fill in their actual tax returns or pay their council tax bills. Now, I make 2 points that I've come from my own clients. I have clients, I have an IT guy who's actually the pastor in his local church, and I've got a couple who actually tithe their income to charity. But when we come to do their tax returns, they are just like everybody else. They want their personal tax to be as low as possible, regardless of their beliefs. And I have a lot of working class clients, electricians, builders, and so on. Now, last year, we had the self-employment grants that were available during lockdown. Now, they were all entitled to 5 grants. Most of them didn't take anything like that amount. They mostly just took 1 or 2. Now, they were entitled to them, but they didn't apply for them because they thought it was wrong. They thought they were actually working, they didn't need the grant, so they weren't going to apply. So they're not coming at this from a position of greed. They're not greedy, trying to get money, but at the same time, they don't want money going to what they regard as the undeserving poor. And the problem with all this is that all these people have votes. And I don't see, from what everybody said, it would be nice to get there. But to get there, you've got to persuade a lot of people who aren't that interested in politics, but who do have votes, that it is in their interest somehow to put up tax, change the basis of tax, put up council tax, whatever. And that's the thing that I haven't actually heard anybody say a lot about, how we go about changing those people's minds.
Thanks, Gordon. John, Robin, well, bring both these back in on this if you want, as soon as you were mentioned.
Well, I mean, I can answer that for the
Robin.
Ridiculous length, and I won't. But there's just a couple of things to say, first of all. I mean, there's a lot of research in this, so people's behaviours. The problem is that if everyone thinks everyone else is cheating, they cheat. If everyone else thinks everyone else is minimising their tax bill through aggressive tax planning, they do the same thing. So what you've got to do is stop people from aggressively reducing their tax bill. One of the really interesting measures is if you look at what's happened in the 50 years since Thatcher rolled back the higher rate income tax, is every time that you cut every time you cut top rate tax, tax avoidance increases, it doesn't decrease, right? So if you say, I'll tell you what, we're going to cut top rate tax from 70% to 60%, then you'll have no need to dodge the money. All it does is it says to them, aha, you see, I was right all along. They should never have had my money. I'm going to dodge it even more. So it's about creating a wider culture. The second thing to say is that not a single thing that I mentioned there requires public subsidy. A lot of what I was talking about was regulation. And the Scottish, my whole point was that the Scottish Government doesn't have the ability to raise money very easily, so they've got to be cleverer and find ways to do things that transform the economy. Another thing is that you underestimate, I think, a bit the distribution curve. So about 80% of people would benefit, 90% of people would benefit from a more equal distribution of pay. And that's the crucial one. This is the thing. I'm not in favour of social security. It is a least worst option once you've failed. But most people would really like to see a fairer income distribution through better economy. And it benefits everybody apart from a tiny number. And then one last final point, I keep doing this for ages, sorry. But one last final point in this one is that when you're talking about the tax, let's take another run at that. So you can always ask a question in a way that works. Do you want to pay an extra 1 pence in income tax? Well, not really. How do you feel about a windfall tax on large corporations? How would you feel about closing the tax loopholes which enable mass tax avoidance at the top of the income spectrum? One of the things which has really been interesting, we've just published a book about ageing, and one of the things which has happened a lot in society of late, and it's not accidental, is that we talk about the ratio of people in work to people retired according to, as a measure of whether we can afford pensions. And this is a trick, because most wealth is not now in salary. The question is, can we raise enough resources to pay? It's not about pitting people in work against people out of work. It's about saying, from whence can we generate the resources to do the things we need? So in the end, what I would answer is, I don't want to fix this through higher taxes. The weird thing is, see, when you make people wealthier, they pay higher taxes anyway, and they actually are okay with paying higher taxes. So if you look, our tax system is more progressive than the Nordic countries, because our tax system has to be more progressive than the Nordic economies, because their pay spectrum is much flatter, so they don't have to compensate for it with tax. So one more time, this is all of us looking at all of our problems through the lens of failure. If you look at them again through the lens of success, where you've created an economy that doesn't create in-work poverty in the first place, you don't have to raise money for social security to give people a bung because they're working 40 hours a week and they can't feed a family of 4. That's the fundamental problem here. And again, That is not taking from people in medium incomes to give to people in low incomes. That's about restructuring the economy away from the phenomenally powerful interests which have caused it to go in the opposite direction. Sorry, that was my short version of that answer. You'll gather that as a lefty, I've spent quite a lot of time talking that one over.
Thanks, Robin. John, do you want to come in on that there?
Yeah, just a couple of very specific points, Gordon. I think it is a really important issue, and that, you know, poverty is going to be solved by everybody making a contribution and winning the hearts and minds of everybody. So some concrete examples what you're getting at there. Scottish Business and Community supported a living wage campaign for a long time, trying to demonstrate to its members the value for them if they paid their workers a living wage. Self-interest generated by having a more effective remuneration system that the company benefited as well as society. Willie Hawkey, now whether this is realised or not, who knows? Willie Hawkey has got a plan just now to build 11,000 of affordable homes in Scotland. He's already started it in the Gorbals. Now, if it's delivered, and it's a big if, of course, his plan is to reduce the amount that an individual, or sorry, a household would spend on housing from something of the order of 55% down to 27%. His idea is disruptive thinking. He's trying to bring a whole new way of thinking to housing provision and, you know, invest in high-end technology in the houses itself, do something very, very different. Now, whether or not he solves that is a really interesting issue and would be transformative for Scotland. But the point I'm making is there's an example of somebody with a lot of wealth using that wealth for social good. You know, we've had it in the past, you know, that you've got your borough collections right through to every single public park we've got the length and breadth of Scotland. It was named after an entrepreneur who decided to give some of that wealth up for the greater common good, right back to David Dale and Hugh Lanark. So I think there's lots of ways in which, you know, you could pander to the super rich, but that money could work a little bit better for a little bit more people, as well as the small scale businessmen. There are concrete things we can do that is in their self-interest to make that contribution. But I don't think you can underestimate it. You know, people like pounds and pence in their own pocket, and you'll always get people that want to reduce the amount of taxation they pay. I would agree with Robin to an extent. You need an effective system that makes sure that the proper amount of taxation is paid. But I don't like to make enemies. You know, I think that I'm not quite of the ilk of a Derek Hatton that we should all be driving Rolls Royces and that's the solution to the world's ills. And I don't quite take a New Labour viewpoint who was, you know, relaxed with millionaires. I think we do need a slightly more punitive system than we've got just now, but I don't think we necessarily need to make enemies left, right and centre. I think there's a lot of progression that can be done by demonstrating to people the self-interest individually, in businesses, in communities and for the country if we just began to use our wealth in a different way.
Thanks, John. Gordon, you want to come back on anything that either John or Robin said there?
No, I mean, they're both very, very comprehensive answers. I still think that Robin is being a bit, I don't know, utopian's not right, but a bit optimistic. And I still think that we need to change people's minds. But yeah, doing it the way that John suggested, yeah. That's all. I don't really have anything else I'd want to say on that.
Okay, Gordon, thank you very much.
Can I be a pest here and just jump back in? I mean, I don't tend to be as extreme in my viewpoints as Robin, but you need Robins in the country, and I'm not being patronising here. You need somebody that shouts from that side of the perspective and says, look, this is what we could have if you're going to create the political space somewhere to the centre where things are actually going to get done. And I think you need those troubling voices, disruptive voices that annoy people, and some might call it utopian or whatever, but I don't think if you've not got a common wheel and you've not got a, you know, McAlpine doing what he does, then I don't think we've got any chance whatsoever in the current political system of anything done that's progressive. So keep shouting, Robin, even if I don't necessarily agree with everything you do.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Robin. We'll go back to folk with their hands up. So Eileen Spence, you want to come in and give your question? I know you've not got your hand up now, but you put a question in the chat a good while ago and I said I would come to you next. Right, sorry, you were on mute there. Just to see if you wanted to, the questions that you put in the chat a while ago there, if there was any you wanted to direct to any of the panel that we've got.
Right, well, two things. Private sector housing. Right, I don't know what we're going to be able to do about that, given that 25% of all MPs down in Westminster are actually private landlords, and they decide how much we get by way of housing benefit in order to pay these rents, particularly for folk that are on benefits. And amounts decided on a month-to-month basis by local housing allowance people, and they decide from area to area what that's going to be. I think that's going to be a difficult one, right? But what I'm also seeing more and more is that young people who have got no hope of getting access to public sector housing coming into the private sector, right? Looking for housing and not getting it. And I could despair about it, right? How young people can't start their lives off. Right? That's number one. And the second thing that I'd heard mentioned was, and it's something that really I find it quite interesting, is mental health, and particularly mental health in prisons. And I know there's been a lot has been said about mental health in the women's sector, right, in the women's estate, but there is just as much by way of mental health problems in the men's sector, and particularly amongst youngsters. You know, youngsters that maybe end up in Pullman at age 16, and what's available for them. And I often used to think, because I used to go and visit somebody there, and I often used to think, you know, a lot of these laddies, they're needing somebody to make them a plate of soup, tell them to come in at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, get your clothes washed. No, you're not staying out, you're coming in, right? And it's all the knock-on effects of a poverty in our society, where youngsters have been left without a parent through death, through drugs or drink or something else, right, or have ended up looked after kids, right? And it's a revolving door that's going through the young criminal justice system. And I'm certain of it, that the people that are running it have never had a member of their family in jail, ever, right? And the decisions that are making are the wrong decisions. And family members who are trying to be supportive to a family member, you know, who's in jail, they're treated as bad as criminals when you go to visit somebody. Lots of things there. I know it's an interest of mine that I would like to get involved in a New Scotland.
Rona, I'll just I'll pin you there if you want to come back in on anything. I mean, I know that we're going to be we have got plans to do some event in respect to mental health, and ranging through the ages. But I'll just come back to Rona, because you'd mentioned about prisons, etc. You want to come back in on anything that Eileen had said there?
Eileen, totally agree with you. You raised about 5 different issues there, every one of them completely valid. 2 things I'll pick up on. Firstly, just to remind people that all health services in the prisons are run by the NHS and have been for several years now, which was right. I worked towards that because I thought it was the right thing to do. And you mentioned young people in particular there. Most of these young people shouldn't be in prison, Eileen. They don't need to be in prison. You're absolutely right. They need a mammy or a daddy or somebody, or granny, somebody that's going to look after them. And in many, many cases, if we supported the mammies and the daddies that want to support them, they wouldn't be in prison at all, or they could manage them outside with a lot of support. Same is true, and I know they're experts in social work, same is true for a lot of the radical social workers who try to keep kids with their families, but with much, much greater levels of support. One of the things I did want to say about mental health in prisons, though, was one of the tragedies is that a lot of people who come into prison, and you're right about men having mental health issues, and sadly when men express those issues, they cause an awful lot of chaos and destruction and violence and so on. Not necessarily their fault, but a lot of people who come into prison have never had their mental health issues identified or addressed in the community. So for a lot of them, it's the first time they've come into contact with mental health services. And what we're seeing in it, I mean, it all harks back to the quite right move to close down big mental health institutions and move it to the community. But the resources never went into the community when they shut those hospitals down. So there really is not very little, but not nearly enough care in the community. And there's not a range of services. Some people need 24-hour care. Some people need to live in group homes. You know, some people need that constant supervision. And we don't need to bung them all in hospitals or prisons to get it. But I know Eva's put in there that we're going to talk a lot more about mental health impunity. But just to say, please come back to that one, Eileen, because I'm definitely interested. And just when I was a prison governor, I used to go into visits all the time to speak to families and visitors and say, what's your experience been of coming in here today? So totally sympathise with you on that one.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rona. Thanks very much, Eileen. Right, we've had a couple of questions come in from some of our subscribers and followers of the channel. And specifically, I don't know who they would be directed to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all the panel members and just pin the panel members onto screen. And then if this is something that you can answer or you feel you can contribute towards, excellent. So just give me a wee second to get the full panel pinned. This will look better on recording, folks. It's just having to run through. Oh, there's Pauline there. And right, so the questions, I'll ask both of them, and hopefully you can either answer both or somebody can answer each one. ONS stats say that 33.6% of households in Scotland are single adult households. In a society where politics is dominated by talk of families, what can Scotland offer single adults, particularly with respect to the poverty many will experience in an economy that demands 2 full-time wages just to survive? The second question, around 1 in 4 women reach the age of 40 and are childless. Recently, ONS revealed almost 50% of women aged 30 are childless. Numbers are predicted to be similar for men. Do you think there are any issues facing these women that have been neglected in Scotland? And if so, what politicians can do to address those issues? Do you think politicians can continue to ignore this group of women? So that's whoever.
I know who that was.
Ah, so they are. Right, over to you then, Robin, if you want to just take the mantle here.
I'll take a run at this and others can jump in just because nobody else had the hand up. There's a very, very specific profile to the single households. So if you look at who they are, they're young and they're old. And they're not the same set of problems. So young people tend to be in comparatively low paid work at an early stage in their careers in expensive housing, and they suffer real financial duress because of that. Whereas older people, it's often not the financial duress of living alone, which is the problem. It's the loneliness factor, the psychological impact of it. They've often paid off mortgages or they're in houses that they no longer are paying for. So it's not so much the cost element of some of those groups that are living older, although it can be. And in both occasions, I think this is an example of where we've got to look to society to fix these things. One of the things that we keep doing with our community work is we've got to move back to communities where loneliness isn't an inherent part of society, because we've created the social facilities, social structures where people don't get isolated in these ways. But I mean, the basic answer to that question is the same, is really right down to the thing I just about started with, which is wage to housing cost ratios. They've just gone way out of whack. And there's no way that you can move from 3 times to 7 times the average income being the average house price without creating duress. So you've got to take actions to reverse that, or we're going to keep going in this direction indefinitely. And if you want to, I mean, I'm not really super qualified in the question of fertility rates, women and childbirth, but obviously you get this point where the major inflection point is education. More educated women have fewer children. That's actually a good thing globally, because we're not exactly short of population. But then you reach a point where it becomes an issue. And if you want to go back the other way, it's about the structure of being a citizen in Scotland. It's to do with childcare. It's to do with expectation of working hours. It's to do with our mobility. So we work further from home, which compounds all of these problems. We stress too much. We don't have a time with families, which is another key part of it. We tend to rush home and microwave food, and we don't have time to do these things. And the prospects of having a child in these contexts can often seem daunting and overwhelming. So what we've got to do is rebalance our society in terms of the chasing money versus chasing well-being, really. And if we can rebalance away from the assumption that success is all measured in cash. I put it a fairly simple way. We live as a society where a GP that saved your mum, gave birth to your daughter, you know, and helped somebody with a chronic condition, pulls out a car, a sports car in front of you, and they go, "Oh, nice car." They say, no, that guy just saved your mom, gave birth to your daughter, and helped someone with a life-saving problem. That person is a hero because of their education and dedication to the community. And the fact that you've got your eyes in their car tells you what is going wrong with our society. So we need to reorientate away from this pressure to work more so we can spend more, and try and reorientate back to society, which enables us more time to live and be with people. That gives you the confidence to feel that you can take on commitments like childcare, or like caring for an elderly relative, or like volunteering in your community, or like standing as a council candidate, or any of these sorts of things. If you have no time in your life, everything feels impossible. And if you have a better balance of time in your life, things feel possible again. And we've gone far too far in one direction, and we need to go back in the other.
Thanks, Robin. Colin, you want to unmute and come in on that?
Yeah, just hopefully briefly. You know, one of the things that we're proposing in our National Care Service thing, which really is the kind of all-embracing service for people as individuals and in whatever kind of group they want to live in, whether it's family or not, is the idea of rediscovering the idea of promoting social welfare as a public duty. That was enshrined in the Social Work Scotland Act in 1968. And it's actually still there, but we never talk about it anymore because our services are targeted on the people we consider are most vulnerable in society. And usually that's children, actually. You know, there's nothing more scandalous than a child that dies at the hands of their parents and the authorities knew, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, people, you know, get outraged at that. And that's why services are targeted. Did you know, folks, that we've found out through research that's been done that something like 1 in 5 children in Scotland are referred to child protection services before the age of 5. Now, you know, that's absolutely ridiculous. That's not a good, useful use of scarce resources. So we need to target resources back to communities, and every member of a community, we need hubs that are friendly, where people, social workers and other people are there to help and support, and not just intervene in people's lives when they've already gone tragically wrong. And if we get back to that model, then it doesn't matter who you are or what your living circumstances are, you should be able to go along to a hub like that and talk to somebody that you recognise who is well known and trusted where you live, which, you know, quite honestly, police officers and social workers and people like that are not. They no longer are, if they ever were. We need to get back to that community idea, and we need to get back to the promotion of social welfare. And we don't, and that should be a right. But when we're talking about rights, you don't just bolt that onto a piece of legislation and say to people, you have a right to this, that, or the other thing, because the rights are absolutely meaningless without, we've talked in our document about the 4 R's. Rights go along with responsibilities of government, particularly to make the resources, so there's 3 of the R's, ready, available to people. So rights mean responsibilities, resources, and Robin, I've forgotten the 4th one, but these 4 R's should all work together. Relationships, it's all founded on relationships, which I've just been talking about. So people, like when they go to a GP, they're talking to somebody they know and trust and seeking support from them. Thanks.
Thank you, Colin. Pauline, do you want to come in on that?
Yep. Hi. I would just like to say something about the single person question, and Robin mentioned about the loneliness and the isolation that's out there. It really is pretty bad. I've met a lot of people, and it's usually older people that are feeling especially isolated, and what Thea Hills is doing is with their community room. We're going to be having, there's all sorts of things springing up right now. Somebody says a while ago, how do people find out about these things, and that is a big problem. But there is a lot out there for people. There's men's sheds, community gardens, there's Tea in the Pot, which is an organisation in Govan in Glasgow, and there's lots of these groups that are springing up, and that is one of the things that Thea House is going to be doing as well. We're going to be, because we understand and realise that community centres are all shut down where I mean, I'm for the south side of Glasgow, I'm an Ardennes, and there's nothing in Ardennes, and there's nothing in lots of parts of Pollok. All these community spaces are gone for whatever reason. So we really need to build up the community spaces again. We need to let people know there's places for them to come. We're going to be having sewing classes, knitting classes. Some of the Aldrins are going to come in and teach everybody how to knit, how to make soup. I mentioned that earlier. We're going to have something called the Big Dinner once a month. And that is something everybody's so excited about, because everybody's going to come in and help cook a meal. There is nothing more sociable than breaking bread with somebody. And every now and again, I'm going to sneak the local MP in, or the local head teacher in, or somebody for Sam H in, sitting at the table, just to break down the barriers as well that people have got. There's a lot of people that when you speak to them about the help that's available, they're too embarrassed, or they're too shy to actually ask, or they feel a bit intimidated. So in a nutshell, community needs to return, and it needs to return in the most massive of ways, because the amount of people I've spoken to that, you know, are so lonely, and they've got nowhere to go. If it's not the pub or the bingo, there's really nothing else out there for older people. There truly isn't. So we need to work at that. We need to have community gardens. We're going to be having a grief cafe. I know that sounds a bit, you know, but we're going to be running a grief cafe once a month in Thea House with the Fuse Foundation, because there's a lot of people that are going through different issues, and there's nowhere for them to go. The mental health services are stretched beyond, you know, we're all very aware of that. So it really is just about community. I mean, we've just got a pop-up ladder at the moment, and I scrounged a couple of sofas off of one of the organisations across the way, and it's sat in the corner with a kettle and a packet of biscuits, and it gets used every single day, because the amount of people that come in, and they do come in for their shopping, and they do come in for help with different things, but my God, they love a wee sit down and a wee gab. I mean, it really is that simple for many people. Company, somebody to listen. You don't need to solve the issue, but just be there to listen. So I'm hoping that kind of answers the singles, but it usually really is older people that I'm coming across that are feeling isolated. I've not really met a lot of younger people, but I know it's an issue for them as well. I can't talk to the woman in the fertility thing. I don't know. I'm 15. I've got 3 grown-up kids, so I don't know anything about that. Sorry.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Pauline. Thanks very much, Colin, Robin, John, and Rona for being on the pin there. I'm going to replace the pin and go back to folk that have raised their hands. So we've got Frank. Frank, over to you for your question. If you want to unmute.
Is that me?
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah, I just wondered if there was another Frank waiting. Well, this is I think this is the best panel program I've ever seen, quite honestly. And just congratulations to everybody that's spoken. I include all the questions that have been asked and all the comments that have been made as well on the chat. Rita mentioned what happened in Berlin many years ago, how the people took to the streets to get certain things changed, and this is throughout history. This is the best way of making a government take notice. And I have a question for Eva, actually, in connection with that. Eva, Tommy Sheridan, who has associated himself with the Alba Party, so much so that I think he's decommissioned Solidarity in doing so. He was a major player in the poll tax demonstrations, the anti-poll tax campaign, and I think we need to take to the streets on all these issues in a peaceful way, like the All Under One Banner people have done. But in my opinion, All Under One Banner have lost the way. they're frightened of offending the SNP. And in fact, this week they've been sort of celebrating the fact that SNP speakers are going to be speaking at all the rallies this year, as if that's something good. So we need to give the present Scottish government a real fright in the council elections. And I have heard that the Alba Party are working on a way to vote in the council elections, so that it will give us the best chance of getting as many members as possible. Because I don't think that most people in Scotland know how the council election, the electoral system actually works, and I'm not too sure myself. I think the candidates and the activists need to have it explained to them how do we vote in these council elections to maximise the potential of the Alba Party and to give the SNP a kick up the backside, because all these points made tonight have come back to one thing: this SNP government has lost the way, and that's why I left it. I left the party anyway. What can either give me any hope that you know, this issue's gonna be dealt with, so that we can give them a real shock in the council elections? That's the first start anyway, to the first step towards getting some of these issues dealt with. Thank you.
Eva, you're on. Oh, there we go.
In the first instance, Colin, I would say that I'm happy to come along to your Stirling Lacu and talk in greater detail where we're amongst only Alba members, because obviously there's people here tonight that are not members of that party. In general terms, though, yeah, Tommy Shelley is an active member of Alba, and in the context of all under one banner, I'm one of the people who's agreed to speak at one of their forthcoming rallies. So I'm all for cooperation across the board. Yes, I know what the history of this country has held in recent years, but I'm more interested in the future than in the past. So I hope that's good enough for you just now.
Thanks, Eva. Thanks, Colin. Well, Frank, as I know, is there, you want to come back on anything there, Frank?
Well, I'll no, it's all right. I'll take Eva up on the offer of coming to the Stirling Lacu, and we can talk about it more there.
Thank you very much. Father Hamid, sorry, you've had your hand.
Can I just say one thing?
Yep.
Peter, I've just thought of one thing that I could add to that. The blue bottle in the ointment of this working together, commendable attitude is Nicola Sturgeon. So I mean, I know that I've still got many friends in the SNP, and lifelong friends, and I would work with them. I'd work. I mean, Phil Boswell is a shining example, and Phil doesn't mind speaking his mind, and you know, agrees with a lot of the criticism of the SNP. Until there's a, in my opinion, until there's a change in leadership of the SNP, they're not going to work with us. So, I mean, I would work with them, but Nicola's not going to have it. So that's a big blue bottle in the ointment.
Thanks for that, Frank. I'm still a great believer in hope over fear. So we'll just leave it at that for the minute. And Farah, I'll come to you. I know it should be your hand up for a long time. Apologies, I haven't got to you sooner.
Thank you for inviting me on the panel.
You're welcome.
And I just want to say it's been a great pleasure listening to all the speakers, very motivating. And Frank, I do believe taking to the streets is one way of dealing with it, just like the Berliners. And Gordon, to you, I'm looking forward to the utopian society. I do believe charity begins at home. I can't wait for an independent Scotland. I have been looking forward to it since I was a child. and I can't wait to fill the bellies of all the children in Scotland, you know. When I look at all the third world countries and how they all work together to fill, you know, the stomachs of the children, how the communities all get together. And Philip, I mean, when he talks about, you know, in India and how the communities work there, I mean, it kind of puts me to shame when we see what's going on here in Scotland. I mean, I worked as a teacher. I worked in the civil service, and I saw what was going on, saw things going on here. And I'm ashamed to say I was in the Kelvin committee for the SNP as well. So I saw firsthand what was going on there as well. And also I experienced poverty myself. I was in a refuge with my younger children. I've accessed food banks. I've worked, it's been a long journey to get to where I am. So, I mean, I'm not doing this for myself. I've always wanted to see Scotland on the map. It's my home, it's my Scotland, and it's my Glasgow. And I want to work for all of the children, all of the people of Scotland. I can't see, I saw everything being stripped. I went through the Thatcher era, and I'm seeing it again the last 7 years with this SNP. And I don't want to see us struggle ever again. And I think...
Oh, sorry, Farah, on you go.
No, that's all I wanted to say. And I'm walking in the steps of giants. So thank you very much for having me on this panel.
You're welcome. Thanks very much for coming along. Eva, do you want to come back in? There's no more hands raised. If anybody wants to add anything, please just feel free to raise your hand, and I'll try and get you back on. But Eva, do you want to come back in as the Equalities convener to end the overall night?
There's Phil wanting to say something
first. Right, okay. Phil, I'll come to you first then.
All right, Farah, you'll do for me. That was magic. That's exactly what we want to hear. And the point you make is extremely well made, Farah. In 2000, the United Nations made an attempt to say, we're going to try to reduce poverty, world poverty amongst children by 50%. And everybody went, aye, right, no chance. It was achieved in 2012. You can do this. I live in, I work in a very remote part of India, Bihar, near the Nepal border, building this bridge across the Ganges. And the poverty it's one of the poorest parts of India. But the government's done wonders in spite of all the problems. And you'll know what I'm talking about, Farah. The starvation it's not quite a thing in the past. Poverty is certainly not a thing in the past. The starvation, the bellies are getting filled, as you say. There's been huge steps made all around the world, and yet we are taking backward steps here, Farah. So I know exactly what you're talking about, and it's not acceptable. So more power to you, and let's see what we can do about Indy.
Thanks very much, Phil. Farah, do you want to come back in on what Phil said there? Are you happy with that?
No, I believe that if we keep our families happy, our people fed, it leads to a productive economy. I mean, when you look across the world, what this people are doing, even I mean, look at the Japanese models, what they do with their work people in the mornings with the exercise, you know. I mean, forget Clive James and his, what was it, the program he did. But when you look at the Japanese economy and they exercise with their workers in the morning, you know, and even in the third world countries, you know, you have community-based programs and they have work cooperatives, you know, instead of, you know, making people embarrassed about, you know, poverty. We should be helping our communities, building work cooperatives, empowering them, you know, not embarrassing them.
That's absolutely excellent, Farah. I totally agree with what you've said there. I've got another couple of people that have raised their hands. So Eileen, I'll come to you. You've had your hand raised, and then I'll come to Alan Petrie thereafter. So Eileen, on you go.
Right, unmuted. Hi, right. Given this is about equality, right, really glad it's come up, and something that you know, has been close to my heart over the past year, Peter, is the massive inequality in what's happening in our schools at the moment. Now, we have a sex and relationships education programme which has been embedded in the national curriculum, right? And it's going to be imposed on the poorest children in Scotland. An ideology that is so flawed is unbelievable. And the private schools in Scotland do not have to partake in it. They don't. They're not going to have this forced on their children. I'm hoping that some people, you know, cross-party, we can all get together and actually address this, because I am not having young children preyed upon by predatory adults because of what's happening in schools.
Hear, hear, Eileen. Thank you very much. Alan Petrie, and you come, mate. I'll just replace the pin.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, we were talking about equality and we're talking about poverty tonight. And very soon we're going to be facing the local elections. And these are the places that we can be dealing with these issues. Local councils have millions upon millions of pounds in reserves that are kept aside for civil service priorities. It's time that our local authority councillors look into these reserves and start earmarking them to deal with the poverty that's involved within our communities. That is where we need to take the decisions into local councils, deal with the problem at the lowest level possible. The other issue is inequality. Scottish Parliament bring in so many guidance. One of the first things that Alex Salmond did when he became First Minister was remove ring fencing of council budgets. That allows councils then to take a decision whether to take the guidance on board or just to do their own priorities. And local councils must, in my opinion, take their own priorities and just say to the Scottish Government, if you want your priorities to be put forward, fund it. If not, we will fund our own priorities, and our priorities is to remove the poverty and inequalities within our communities. And I think that's the way we should be going forward.
Thanks, Alan. Does anybody else want to come in before I come back round to Eva? Anybody, any of the panel members, anything wish to add? Lucy for Parents Across Scotland, did you have a question for Pauline? Or have you dealt with that in the chat?
No, it got answered, Peter. Thanks
right,
anyway.
Sorry, I thought I'd seen your hand raised at one point, and I was
did.
wondering
Then I took it down again, so
right,
we're fine.
that's fine. Right. So I've got no more raised hands for questions. So Eva, I'm going to come to you as the Alba Equalities convener and organiser for the event this evening.
I would just like to thank everybody for all the contributions tonight. There's a lot of hard work and a lot of thought gone into this event, and I think it's really been quite successful. Scotland's got a lot of problems. We've spoken about many of them tonight, but I think that the hearts and the minds of the people that are here and the people out there that we can talk to and convey tonight's messages to will have the power to turn Scotland around, provided that the political will is also there, and it's up to each and every one of us to make sure that it is. A very special thank you to you, Peter, for hosting this. I know that you've been a bit nervous and a bit anxious about how it would go, but I think it's been fantastic, and it's a testament to your own dedication to our country. So good on you. Thank you.
I mean, well, everybody here and everybody that's contributed, I do this for the love of my country. It's for the love of Scotland that I do things. I see how quickly we're going downhill, and see that there are ways to change it that seem to be getting ignored. Poverty has been a big driver in my life, and I've been fortunate to get myself out of poverty, and I'm now creeping back in there, and it wasn't a nice place to be. I see other families like it, and I try and help as much as I can. So while I've got any say or any way of doing or providing any help that's going to help with the betterment of Scotland, I'm willing to do that. Again, I would like to echo Eva's words and thank all of the panel for coming along and contributing, to all our guests for coming along and contributing. It's all parties and none here. So please, for anything in the future that you feel as if you can be getting a message out, there's going to be future events that Eva's organising, and I'm quite happy to put on, and I'll try and do the same for anybody to try and get the betterment of Scotland. So thank you, Eva. Thank you to the Alba Party. Thank you to all of our panel and our guests. But if there's no further questions, I guess I'm done for the night and it's on to editing.